Hello, everyone. My name is Alex B. Cruz, and we have the pleasure of being here with Brenda Peynado. We're going to be discussing her brand new book coming out very soon in August of 2024, Times Agent, The Times Agent. Uh, Before we begin, let me introduce our amazing author. Brenda Peynado is a Dominican-American writer of fiction, nonfiction, and screenplay. She often writes about Latina girlhood, class, race, and commodity culture through literary realism, magical realism, and near-future science fiction. Her stories have won a Nelson R. Grant Award from Chicago Tribune, an O. Henry Prize, a Pushcart Prize, inclusion in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, Best Most Fiction, Best Microfiction Anthologies, two Vermont Studio Center fellowships, and other awards. That is absolutely incredible. Um, and we're going to be discussing this, her upcoming novel, Times Agent. And I'm going to read a little bit before we let you, hand up over the mic to you, Brenda. Following humanity's discovery of pocket worlds, we'll talk more about that. Teams of academics embarked on groundbreaking exploratory missions, eager to study these new technologies and harness the potential of a limitless horizon. What would you do given another universe, a do-over? Archeologist Raquel and her wife Marlena once dreamed pocket worlds held the key to solving the universe mystery. But 40 years later, pocket worlds are now controlled by corporations squeezing every penny out of all colonizable space and time. Raquel herself is in disgrace, and Marlena lives in her own pocket universe and refuses to speak to her. Standing in the ruins of her dream and her failed ideals, Raquel seizes one last chance to redeem herself and confront what it means to solve something or someone from time. Okay. How are you, Brenda?
Good. Thanks, Alex. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Yes, I'm very excited to chat with you, and I'm very grateful for Dominican Writers Associations to give me this opportunity. And I want to say that I am guest, a guest reviewer and a guest interviewer of you. And again, I want to thank Dominican Writers Association for giving me this opportunity. Um, so to begin, can you tell us, okay, do you want to read the first chapter of your story, of your novel?
Yeah, I can read. So this is a book that it goes very quickly. So the first chapter is just like a page and a half, and a lot of the chapters go sort of a little bit like candy. So yeah, I'll read the first page or so. When the Institute's dispatch hums to life on my old watch, I am in the middle of celebrating the morning of my 38th birthday. A frutero drone offers me a mango across my apartment's windowsill with its skinny legs. Supplicant position, I hold out my hands to receive it. The mango is dropped fat and heavy in my palms. I know it's an exorbitantly expensive new subspecies grown in PW 3751, owned by the United Future Fruit Company. My headlink chimes with the sound of the debit hitting my account, and then the drone buzzes away from the window toward the new malecon. The mango rolls across my plate. I crosshatch one golden slice, turn it inside out so it will splay. When I set that fire in PW 3751, the one that sent me into disgrace, it was in hopes that this mango and the others like it would never be produced, the literal fruit of my failure before me. I stick a candle into the grid made by jutting mango pieces, a large paraffin candle made a petroleum byproduct extracted from PW 7694 until its ecosystem collapsed under the oil spills coating everything in black. Another pocket world, ecologically decimated, another update of the times. I light the candle and it sputters and blazes the way I saw those mango fields go up in flames. Happy birthday, me. Embrace the new times, I was told when I emerged from PW 3845. After 40 years taken from me in the blink of a few seconds relative, I stumbled out of that PW into all that I'd lost in those 40 years. The Institute transformed, the entire world I knew scarred by war, my parents and daughter gone, Nothing but my wife and the pocket world I wore around my neck as refuge. Santo Domingo is a city I barely recognize as home. My apartment belongs to someone else, and the sea rasps at the new Malecón just a few streets away, having swallowed most of my neighbors in its rising. Well, look at me embracing the times. No longer Agent Raquel Petra of the Institute, but I'm still celebrating. Mírame. I'm ready to take a wish. I take a breath. The raging air in my lungs screaming to be let out, I chant, I will not think about before. I will not think about before. But time never lets it be that easy, does it? Grief can make a single breath feel like 1,000 years. But when you want to stay in the moment forever, time is a hound that hunts you down. Time, my enemy. Time, the thief. Thanks.
That was absolutely amazing. And you said that it reads like candy. And I every chapter after the first chapter, you just the reader gets this little bit of like, oh, moment, like, yes, this goes back to the beginning, and this goes back to the beginning. And it goes like that, like layers and layers that gives you like like a satisfaction, like a push, like a continue, like you want to keep reading to discover more of that beginning. Like what inspired you to write this story?
Yeah. So this started as a short story, um, a failed short story because I just kept writing it and kept getting longer and longer. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to put this away for a little while because it is clearly doing something other than what I want it to do. But it started off as a short story about a woman who keeps trying to, her daughter has died, and she keeps trying to, um, she puts her daughter in a robot dog, puts her consciousness in this robot dog, and she knows the consciousness isn't quite exactly her daughter because her human daughter has died, but she keeps thinking that part of her process of grief is that she's going to keep resetting her daughter. She's trying to give her daughter the perfect day, and every time she doesn't get the perfect day, she resets her to try again the next day and the next day and the next day, and she keeps not being able to get that perfect day. And it started off as a meditation on grief, and especially this sort of like lost innocence. It ended up spiraling into being a lot more than that because, of course, if you think about the grief over losing a child, how can you write about lost innocence without also, eyes wide open, acknowledging the selfishness of keeping somebody in this sort of broken world, or and also grieving this broken world that you want to keep them in, and also acknowledging our own wants, as parents, as sort of like wanting their lives to be this sort of this protected space, and knowing that there are costs to that and costs to that protection. So it started being about this broken world, and grieving over the state of the world that that as parents we hand our kids, but then also that whole, it became a meditation on the self also, that selfishness of wanting something to be perfect, to be protected, to be innocent. And from there it became a meditation on human greed, and then that started talking about capitalism, and then from there it was our ability to look away from others in order to try to fully live ourselves. So it ended up being a lot more than I intended it to be and that I started out with. But and then I had to also, that's a grief calls to mind, despair and a lot of the darkest of human emotions. But I, from there, had to write myself into some kind of hope, or some kind of how can we move forward, even while being aware of all of our own complicity in the mess that we find ourselves in.
Oh wow! I'm telling you that in I did not know that it was that it started as a short story, but there is something about it. There is, I don't know if it's like the satisfaction of at the end of each chapter that gives me the sense of of completion in a way, that of roundness. But I also feel that because I didn't tell you this, but when I started reading this, I wasn't supposed to start until like 2 weeks later because I was doing Tin House. But I got curious, and I'm like, I've had this book for like 2 weeks. Let me just look at it. And next thing I know, it was in chapter 9, and chapter 9 is a big chapter. I don't know if you remember chapter 9, but chapter 9 is a big chapter. And I texted you when I got to it, but it read so fast and so quick that in that sense, you mentioned like candy. Yes, it was like candy. It was addicting, and it was very quick to read and difficult to put down in that sense. And you mentioned, when you were reading, you mentioned Santo Domingo, and I know almost everyone in Dominican Writers Associations know that it is very difficult for us to find a book that even has the word Santo Domingo in it. Like, so why was it important for you this book to be this Dominican, for your characters to say words like diache or tigre, or what was the other one? I wrote the other one in, like, oh, pointing with my lips. Like, why was it important for this book to take place in Tu Tierra in Dominican Republic?
Yeah. I mean, it's me, so I have to write me. Otherwise, what else am I going to write about? But I think on the other hand, too, a lot of it had to do with what I was talking about in this book. In this book, I was talking about grief over sort of this lost innocence of her daughter. But for me, I wrote this, or at least I started to write it before I had a kid. And then when I finally went back to it and finished it into the novella form, by that point I think my first kid, my daughter, was like 9 months old. So I was very much in like babyhood and thinking about motherhood and grief and all of these things. And I hadn't slept in a million years. But
Relative.
um yeah. But I also, when I was thinking about lost innocence, I was thinking a lot about my own childhood and, you know, living school year in the US and then going back every summer and every Christmas and spending all summer in the DR and with various relatives. And I went back in my 20s to live for a year in Santo Domingo, and I was expecting it to be a homecoming. I was just expecting, like, the way you go back for, like a week or a short period of time, and then everybody comes out of the woodwork and it's like, oh my God, they've come back. Like, we're all get out the party, get out the sancocho. We're gonna like make it a thing. And I was kind of expecting like the whole year would be like that. Like I'd just be and then it was kind of like, oh, you're here for a whole year, like mañana we'll get there. And I also got sick during that year and I could like barely leave the apartment. And I ended up experiencing just a lot of grief over that childhood of, like going back to the motherland. And so part of it too, it had to be set in the DR for me, this novel that was so much about that, because it was about, for me, also a lost homeland and grieving that experience of the perfect day that I started out with her wanting to give her daughter. For me, that was always in my childhood, and that was always in the DR. That just like perfect day of summer, be it in the city or in El Campo, like just wanting to get back to that and feeling like you can't ever get there. And so for me, that it had to be set in the DR about, you know, that grief over the lost motherland.
Uh, you mentioned you already spoke about grief, and that was one of my questions. And you also touched a subject that is very close to my heart, which is which is like the dark side of Dominican Republic, and in the sense of the homophobia and the colorism that we lived, and this xenophobia for our neighbors, right? And uh, did you always know that this book was gonna touch this subject, or how did this come about?
Yeah, for whatever reason, when I wrote it, she always had a wife. Um, and then as I started writing into this future world, I had to decide, is this going to be a future that sort of acknowledges and still carries with it the scars of the past of the ways that people treat each other, or is this going to be kind of a more hopeful novel where we've skipped over all of that 100 years into the future and now everything is peachy. And I just thought, it's not far enough in the future. Like how far into the future are we going to get before we can skip over all that? And two, I don't think it does justice to this idea of, one, you're trying to recreate a lost innocence, yes, but it's also an innocence that you are gaining or protecting by looking away from so much tragedy um, going on everywhere, going on to even your friends, but you can sort of look away at that moment. Looking away from poverty. I mean, you didn't mention classism there, but how much can be afforded by just looking away from poverty, from the ways that neocolonialism continues to inspire tragedy in not just our island and our side of the island, but everywhere else. And so for me, I had to write into what it would really be like for even just a little bit near future, even just somebody with a lot more hope because they have this possibility of pocket worlds that they can just visit, this world and this world and this world, and all of it is new and exciting and some of it untouched by other humans. But I couldn't, I didn't feel like it would be honest to write all of those worlds without taking a hard look at our own.
I understand. My writing is very pessimist. My writing is about my experience as a gay Dominican growing up within Dominican culture. So it always touches on that subject one way of another. So I understand and I appreciate what you did here. So thank you very much for that. Uh, so I've been to two amazing colleges in the US. One was Columbia University, and the other one right now is NYU. And I always do this thing where I search when I'm looking for classes, I search for Dominican history and I search for Taino history or any type of
Mm.
and I don't want to give too much away, but there are like Taino in here. That's all I'm gonna say. How was that research like? Was that part of your trip to Dominican Republic? Because I feel like if I want to learn about this, I have to go to DR and I have to live there for a little bit. How was that research like?
Okay, so I know the dangers of research because the book that I'm writing now, I've been working on for about a decade, and it's about La Guerra de Abril, and it's 800 pages long, and that's only focusing on the 6 days before the Americans invade, and that's what I went to the DR to research on and lived there for a year, and did interviews on. By the way, if anybody wants to be interviewed by me about La Guerra de Abril, I would be happy to. Um, but it's taken me 10 years because I am just head first into the research. And so many people are still alive. I mean, a lot of people have died, especially in the 10 years that I've written this book, but there's still people alive today who were in the thick of it. And I don't want to do them the injustice of getting things wrong. Um, but so I did not want this book to take 10 years. And I wanted to, for once, write a book that was light on research. Unfortunately, I kept writing into things that I did have to do more and more research on. But part of the way that I got away from it was allowing it to be set in the future and concerned with future wars and future things meant that I could sort of rely on a little bit hazier memory. However, every time I said something about the Tainos, I had to do a deep dive. I got my gods all mixed up. And I ended up doing a lot of research on Tainos that was based on Puerto Rican Tainos, and I had to sort of like figure out like um, in what ways the Dominican Tainos were different or were surmised to be different, and what could be sort of gleaned from the records because so much was erased. And the other thing I had to do a deep dive on was I'm not a naturalist and I don't know, I know my oak tree and I know my flamboyant, and that's about it. And so every time I had to write this biologist and the archaeologist sort of looking at different species, I definitely had to look that up.
No, yes. Is that why the semi has like the arms of one god and in the body of another?
Yeah, I was like, oh, this will be really cool if they're mixed. Like that way it can be like she can think, aha, something is wrong. And then that can like take off her spidey senses. But it was also because I had written it wrong to begin with. Yes. And then
I didn't mean to call you out on it.
yeah, I had to backtrack.
I want to get the readers a little bit excited, and this has to do something with what you mentioned before about the different commodities that having a pocket world means, and because some of them are devastating, and it has to do with indenture work, and it reminds me a lot of it reminds me a lot of the migration experience of Dominicans here to the U.S. and having to come and leave everything behind to work for the families back home. You have in your novel, you have people that leave for relativamente a day and they work somewhere for, let me say, 40 years, the way that just to use 40 again. um and it's heartbreaking for people to give up their lives just for their families. And another pocket world that kind of really like stuck with me is where the parents basically have no one to take care of their kids, so they would put the kids in a pocket world where the kid will be just there for a second while the parent is working, hopefully only 8 hours, and come back and get their kids. And that takes a toll, not only physically but also emotionally. So can you talk a little bit about those that process and those type of pocket worlds and how you got to it?
Yeah. So I feel like so many time travel novels, when they talk about nefariousness of time travel, they're talking about spy thrillers and government agencies, and it's all on a sort of like big. You can pinpoint the person who's exploiting time. There's a bad guy. Um, but this novel was so much about the island and the way that neocolonialism has done so much. And when I was thinking about these pocket worlds, I was thinking at first like that my character would be so excited, like look at all of these worlds and we haven't even begun to explore them, and how exciting that would be in terms of feeling like the worst of humanity hasn't yet gotten there, but she's arriving and she has in her head all of these thoughts about what she wants from this world and doesn't sort of realize that she too is part of this, um, part of the forces of humanity that are going to get something from all the worlds that she discovers. But and I was also thinking about what are the ways in which time travel isn't just a hopeful thing, but what are all the ways in which, of course, humanity and capitalism is going to use it the ways that they use everything. And what are the ways that you can commodify time and pay people for their time, and for their lives in ways that we've only begun to in sort of regular time. But if you can send somebody away for 40 years and be like, look, your family, they're just going to think you're gone for a day, for 8 hours, for a second. And you can work 50 years worth of work and come back with all the money of 50 years worth of work. How so many people would take that, because that's better than what they already have. And then you have that the sorrow of not just that somebody has worked and somebody has given up their life to work, but that you've missed it in the blink of an eye. Papi comes back and he's 90 years old and you're still only 5. Or what what tragedies could be in those worlds, as well as what beautiful things. I mean, there are mermaids and dinosaurs and beautiful trees. So I wanted to include both things in there.
So we come into like the questions that I have for people that have not, well, my favorite questions, people that have not like encountered your work yet. Because I actually encountered your work because of Angie. Angie told me, oh, look at this author. Angie thinks I'm a sci-fi. Angie, don't listen. Angie thinks I'm a sci-fi writer. I'm not, I'm just a speculative fiction writer. So whenever there's a sci-fi author, she sends it my way, and I love it. I love reading everything. But um, but for someone that's just discovering you, what should they read first?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, by the way, for having my book up there on your shoulder.
Right here.
um, yeah. So my first book is a short story collection, and there's a little bit of everything in there. There's some near future science fiction, there's alien arrivals and ghosts and basements, and um, there's also some more magical realism things in there. People disappearing and people who can fly, sort of returning to their homeland. And then there's also some more realistic fiction about, you know, girls, Latina girlhood, and just girls chatting, trying to be girls. Um, and I would say it kind of depends on what people are interested in, but the story that I feel like Dominican writers might be interested in, especially Dominican Americans, is the title story called The Rock Eaters, about a generation of people who can fly returning to the motherland. And that's sort of that's one of the stories that I wrote when I was living in the DR in my 20s, and thinking about that experience of like returning home and wanting to return to that place of my youth, and not being able to. And then for those that are more interested in sort of bizarre fiction, there's the very first story in that collection is called Thoughts and Prayers, and it's about a school shooting, but it's not particularly gruesome. But it's there are angels on rooftops, and it's about two girls trying to make sense in the aftermath of the tragedy, and sort of thinking about these angels that are on everybody's rooftops, and what they do with the angels.
Right. I also recommend The Whitest Girl. Girl, you read that story and you read it beautifully. And I also recommend, oh my God, I can't believe I did not write the name down. It's about the drownings. What's the story called?
Oh, it's called The Drownings.
Oh, it's called The Drownings. Oh, look at that. So yeah, I recommend The Drownings. And what I love about those two stories is that your writing, and is the use of your the point of view, because I've read stories that were being told in the first person plural before, but the way you did it, I feel like part of it, and and it's amazing. I really think everyone should read those two as well. Um, and para terminar the interview, how can we find you? Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, brendapeynado.com, or I'm also on Twitter or Instagram sporadically. And it's just my name, Brenda Peynado.
Brenda Peynado, muy bien. We'll have Angie write it somewhere down here. So yes. So Brenda, muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo, and when is your book coming out again?
Let's see, August 12th. Gracias por tenerme.
Can we see it? Can we see it? Can we see the
Yes.
cover?
Okay, here this is.
Beautiful cover.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Times Agent, August 13. Make sure to go pre-order it and get it. And Brenda, again, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's my very first time doing this, and I'm glad that it was with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, un placer.
That's it. Bye.